We are back here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It is Thursday, November 13th, as you are listening to this. And I was surprised by what happened yesterday. A couple things came out. First thing that's caught me off guard, it did not go the way I expected, and that is that the House did pass the resolution from the Senate with no changes. It went to Donald Trump, and he signed it. Now, I had been saying that I thought there was a chance that the House would negotiate, make some amendments, send it back to the Senate, and we could be a week and a half out from ending it. And then there was always the possibility, because it was Donald Trump, even though he had said he was going to sign it, that there was a chance he could veto it to keep the government shutdown going even longer. Well, that didn't happen. So this current CR is now in effect. Government should be reopening today as you are listening to this. SNAP payments and all of those things should be going out, which is a good thing. Now, Democrats did not get their priorities of restoring money cut to Medicaid and extending the Affordable Care Act subsidies. However, I don't believe that is the end for those two options. Now, the Senate promised a vote on Affordable Care Act subsidies next month in December. Now, is that going to happen? I believe the vote will happen, and I believe, according to the agreement they reached, it would be on a Democratic-led uh, bill that would be one they draft and that they would go forward with. Now, we don't know if it is going to pass. However, as continued public outcry starts happening, and as people are getting the sticker shock from their premiums for next year, there is a chance that Senate Republicans will cave and side with Democrats to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies for a year, for 2 years, something like that, kick the can down the road. Now, why would they do that? Well, they're starting to break from Donald Trump. And when it is no longer tied to this government shutdown, and they gave Donald Trump the win over the shutdown, they can spin this as a win for Donald Trump and a win for Republicans by saying something like, well, Democrats wanted it indefinite, but we caught them down to, just 2 years. Look at us. Look at how fiscally responsible we are, that kind of thing. And as the public outcry gets better, they're looking at what they can do to change the narrative going into 2026 and the midterms. Their eyes are now focusing on primary challengers and surviving to the midterms. They have less than a year till they are up for election again. At least a third of the Senate and all members of the Republican controlled House of Representatives. Now, beyond that, one of the things I suggested that could happen, and it still might, is that Mike Johnson may get called for a motion to vacate the chair, which that is a way to remove the Speaker of the House. Now, this is something that is set up in the rules when the House starts over, which they start over every 2 years on January 3rd, and they pass a rules package. Now, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, they did not have a motion to vacate. They could not call her uh, to question, basically. They said, okay, if you vote me in, I'm in until our 2 year term is up. And that's exactly what happened. But Kevin McCarthy, in his effort to be Speaker, he wanted to be Speaker of the House so badly that he gave up the farm to Republicans in order to get the job. It took him 17 votes to finally land on Kevin McCarthy. And one of the things he had to promise them was that they would put the motion to vacate back in the rules. And they had it down to as low as one vote. I think with this new rules package for the Congress we are currently in, it's either at 5 or 7. It's still a really low number, but it's slightly higher than one. Now, why would they call to vacate the chair? Well, there's 3 or 4 different reasons why they would vacate Mike Johnson. If this funding resolution for passing the Affordable Care Act subsidies goes through, and Donald Trump is pissed about it, he may try to get rid of Mike Johnson. So he might try to get rid of Mike Johnson because of that. Now, that's more of an outside one. And I thought he could end up getting vacated either as a way of delaying opening the government, because the longer they were delayed, that was less time Donald Trump had to answer for the Epstein files. And I thought that there was a chance that he could get vacated yet because of the Epstein files, and that still might happen. There is going to be a vote next week on the Epstein files. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But when that vote happens, and it looks like Republicans are breaking ranks, Donald Trump may get pissed and call some MAGA supporters in Congress and say, get rid of Mike Johnson, fire his ass. Because that's how Donald Trump is. He only cares about what you bring to the table for him right now. So, with that being said, there is a chance that they call to vacate the chair. Democrats have no reason to save Mike Johnson. So, what could happen? Well, Democrats could go to Mike Johnson and say, look, Senate's going to be bringing up a vote on Affordable Care Act subsidies. We want to pass it too. So you get the votes together. You find 4 or 5 Republicans, however many we need to pass this legislation. You schedule the vote. You get it on the floor and make sure it passes. And when they call to vacate the chair, we save you. Is it plausible? Yeah. Has it happened before? Yeah. When Kevin McCarthy was Speaker, Democrats saved him at least once. Um, and then he turned around after negotiating with them. They got through one funding deal, and then they turned around and tried to stab Democrats in the back, and they were playing games, and Democrats said, okay, next time they try to vacate you, we're not saving you, and they didn't. Because of how narrow the majorities are for both parties, or the margins are, it would take about 5 Republicans and all Democrats to get rid of Mike Johnson. That's not very many Republicans, and there's probably at least that many who would do whatever Donald Trump says. Mike Johnson could be on the hook. Now, who do they get for Speaker of the House? Anybody's guess. It took them 3 weeks, 2 years ago, to come up with Mike Johnson, somebody we had never heard of. And could they go for somebody like that? Sure. Could they go for somebody that's not seeking reelection? Sure. And if it goes too long, once again, and I know this sounds like an outlier and a crazy thing to say, and I thought it was crazy suggesting it 2 years ago when it took them 3 weeks to get to Mike Johnson. But things are even more tense now. It is entirely possible that several Republicans say, you know what, screw this. We're tired of being divided. We need somebody who's going to actually, keep us in session. If there's a looming government shutdown, which could be coming again as early as the end of January, that, hey, who's going to keep the House in session and actually, not send them on a 6 or 7 week break, unscheduled break, paid break, while their constituents are suffering. Now, if there is a government shutdown in January, it is not going to be as bad. Why? Because of this deal that went through. Okay, the deal that they passed does have certain things in it. It does allow for SNAP benefits, food stamps, and those kind of benefits to be paid through the end of September. I believe all military and essential workers will get paid till the end of September, even if the government shuts down again in January. That like air traffic controllers, people like that who weren't getting paid but expected to still go to work will get paid. Now, some of the other things in the bill, and this is where Democrats got things they weren't asking for, and maybe they made the best of a bad situation. And I say that looking at it going, well, Republicans were offered the best deal they could have possibly imagined initially by saying, okay, all they wanted was 1 year of Affordable Care Act subsidies. And Republicans said that was a non starter. So Democrats said, okay, if you won't give us that, well, how about you give us these things? So they got the SNAP benefits, they got the military taken care of, they got essential workers taken care of, which is all great. And then they got limits for how Donald Trump can do reduction in force or mass government firings. And they got everybody basically who was fired during the government shutdown or attempted to be fired because a lot of the courts stepped in and said, no, Donnie, you can't do that. They all get their jobs back. All good things, not going to lie. But the problem with that is it's still not everything the Democrats wanted. But they got those things in place, which is a good thing. It is something. So now they have to work on getting the Affordable Care Act subsidies and the Medicaid money back. And they want to bring a separate vote on it. Like I said, they could save Mike Johnson and have a backdoor deal to keep him afloat. Not to mention, you are having Republicans break from Donald Trump And as they are breaking from him and they're facing problems with their constituents, etc., some of them are going to start looking at it and going, okay, we got to get reelected. We have to pass these Affordable Care Act subsidies. They do not have a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. The best options they have is what Donald Trump has floated, which was his concepts of a plan during the campaign. You had one member of the House of Representatives, I do not remember which one, who was a Republican, said, well, they just have to come up with something better because that's a brilliant plan. That doesn't do or mean anything, it doesn't translate into anything. And then you have Donald Trump's latest brilliant plan that he keeps doubling down on. And I think it proves he has no idea how healthcare in this country works. And I was talking about this on a previous podcast, but I'm going to go into it again because I think it bears repeating. His idea was instead of sending the insurance companies through the government the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, that they should be paid to the American taxpayer and they can go get their own health care. That we should take the money out of the insurance companies. I don't think he knows how insurance works. I don't think he knows how the Affordable Care Act works. He only wants it gone because it has Obama's name on it. Now, uh, what they want to do, or what he's suggesting, is saying, okay, we're just going to send you checks. Okay, so, and I'm going to make it simple. If you were getting a subsidy of $100 a month, they would send you either $100 check every month or a $1,200 check once a year, something like that. And then you would use that money and go buy your own health care. But does he think that people have the funds to do like he does because he is a billionaire or a supposed billionaire? That, he probably has never paid for health care in his life, not as far as having insurance. He probably just goes and pays out of pocket prices because he can, and he doesn't have to deal with it. He doesn't have to deal with any of the problems with insurance. Insurance is not a perfect system because they have problems like prior authorizations, where if they don't think you've tried all of the right options, they can say, well, go back to your doctor, try 3 more things before we will approve this medication. Or they need your doctor to sign off. Well, you started with this expensive medication. Why didn't you try these 3 other medications first? Now, maybe there's an allergy issue. Maybe there's a side effect issue that they're trying to avoid. But because they're cheaper, the insurance company wants them tried first. Insurance has got way too much control over our health care. I realize they are putting money out into it, but it is far cry from where it really should be. But he just says, oh, go out and get your own health care. Does he think, like, for myself, okay, if they send me $1,200, that's not going to cover the cost of my health care for a year. And I'm relatively healthy. I don't go to the doctor but maybe once or twice a year at most for things that have happened. It's not even anything ongoing. And $1,200 would not last very long. And if you're telling me you're going to send me the money and I'm just supposed to pay the higher premium, well, that's just an additional step. It doesn't change how affordable it is. And there will be people who will say, well, instead of getting the insurance because that number is really high and really scary, even though you're sending me that $1,200 check or whatever the number is. I just made 1,200 because it was easy math. But whatever that number is that they would try to send people, well, that big number for my insurance premium is way too scary. I don't want to deal with that. So I'm just not going to get insurance, but I'm going to take that premium money you were going to send me and I'm going to go spend it on whatever I want. It's going to be a mortgage payment. It's going to be a car payment. Maybe it's rent. I mean, at the rate we're going, maybe it's groceries for 2, 3 months, whatever the case may be. And then they have the medical expense and then they don't have insurance. Whereas they might have been willing to get the insurance with the subsidies and, gone through. Now, as far as I know, my employer sponsored plan is not covered with any sort of subsidies from the ACA, as far as I know. But even my plan, which is really good insurance, went up 50%. Now, I'm lucky that I'm on a low tier plan. because I don't use it very often. I took the cheapest option, and my 50% more is something like $7 a paycheck. I'm not complaining at all, but I'm just saying it went up 50% over last year. That is a lot. Um, and if for those that were on the higher plans, if it went up 50%, it's even more. You know, and without these subsidies, there are people that are facing 300% increases. I don't know how they're going to be able to afford it going through the exchanges. And there are people who are saying without the subsidies, et cetera, they are not going to be able to afford their insurance, but they need it because they don't have employer sponsored plans. They don't have access to any other options, and there are medications they need. So they have to come up with something. So ultimately, I think there is a chance that one way or the other, either this month or next, that the Congress gets something passed and they can spin it as a win for Republicans. And if you follow the Rational Boomer, like I think a lot of you do, you probably noticed his live that he did on TikTok last night. Now, I joined, I was only able to be there for the last like 10 minutes or so, but I suggested this idea over there. I suggested this idea that one way you could get Donald Trump to sign off on it would be to pass the ACA subsidies and just tack one little line in there that from now on, the Affordable Care Act will be known as Trump Health Care or Trump Care or something like that. Name it after him. And he would probably be more than willing to jump right on board because he cares about perception and image and having things named after himself and a legacy. And you could probably spin that and gear that up as some kind of a legacy thing in which he is really happy about signing off on these subsidies. So the fight's not over when it comes to getting this done. Now, I know we're disappointed that the Democrats did cave, but maybe this actually works out for the best if they get these subsidies at the end of the year. And I'm still watching the ones that voted to end the government shutdown. If we don't get it, we need to take notice and go after him, including, even though he was against it, we need to go after Chuck Schumer because he didn't keep his caucus in line. And if he wasn't for it and he didn't orchestrate it, then what good is he as a leader if he couldn't keep his party going? Now, there's at least one member of the 8 Democrats that I was not surprised sided with the Republicans, and that being Fetterman. Now, Fetterman from Pennsylvania, I think he ultimately ends up being a one-term senator. He is siding a lot more with Republicans. He is nowhere near as good as I thought he was going to be when he got elected 5 years ago, because I think he is up for re-election now in 26, I think. But I thought he was going to be great, and he brought a younger vibe. He was a different attitude. He didn't wear suits. He showed up in a hoodie and shorts a lot of times. It was a different feel, and I thought that was going to be a good thing and a different perspective. But now that he's in, he is siding more and more with Republicans and sounding more and more like a Republican. It's kind of weird. Okay. So Donald Trump has a problem. Government's open. They couldn't delay it any longer. Mike Johnson swore in Representative Grijalva, and she signed the discharge petition. Now, there are some people talking about things that are going to happen with this discharge petition, and I want to cover a couple of them. There is a special election in Tennessee in December, and it's looking like a Republican is going to win that district. That doesn't matter as far as the discharge petition goes. It won't change the math for how many they need. If they find a way to delay the vote, it's not going to matter because 218 is the number you need. In that, you get to that number because 435 is half of, or is the exact total. Half of 435 is 217 and a half. You can't have half a person. So in order to have a majority in the House of Representatives, you have to get to 218. That's where the number comes from. So his vote or their vote doesn't matter. for that representative. There's also an election coming up out of Texas that is in a runoff that would be won by a Democrat because there's only two Democrats on the ballot. Again, that one doesn't matter. Somebody last night suggested that this Tennessee election was the only one out there. That is not the case. Like I said, there's one in Texas as well. And it will not bring the Democrats up to 219 votes. It won't. The person suggested it. I don't even remember who it was, and this is no hate to them. This is more for clarification. It's something like right now 220 Republicans to 214 or 219 Republicans to 214 Democrats, I think is the current breakdown with two open seats because your total is 435. If this election would bring it up to 219 each, that would mean that we had 438 in the House, and that's three more than the total that could be there. So that's not a thing. But she signed the discharge petition. Now, what does this mean? Well, sometime next week, there is going to be a vote on whether or not to release the Epstein files. Now, Donald Trump still wants it buried. He still wants it hidden. He still wants it dead. And it's not happening. Okay. Mike Johnson cannot stop this vote. Now, some people are trying to say, well, he'll come up with something. He's going to tell them, well, look, we'll get you your vote on the Epstein or on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. We'll get it passed if you kill this discharge petition. But that's not good. That's not a thing. He can't stop it. The whole point of a discharge petition is you are going around leadership. You're going around the Speaker of the House. Okay. They're trying to prevent this from coming up. You're coming up saying, hey, we have a majority at 218 people who want to vote on this. Now, it's not a guarantee that those 218 are going to vote to release the files because it's never a guarantee. But you would assume they would, which means it would pass and then it would go to the Senate. Now, there was a representative today, and I can't remember his name right now, but he came up, and it's going to be the new talking point you are going to see from Republicans. I saw it for the little bit I was in Mike's live last night, and I've seen it in comments on even my own videos where I'm talking about her getting sworn in about this discharge petition, that the Democrats blocked the release of the files. No, they didn't. Okay, what the Republicans were trying to do, or at least this Republican was trying to do, is he wanted to release the files on unanimous consent out of the House of Representatives. It would still have to go to the Senate. And we don't know if it's going to pass the Senate. And ultimately, if it doesn't pass with a large enough margin, Donald Trump can veto it with no problem. Now, one of the things with that is why did the Democrats block it on unanimous consent? Because they know they have the votes to pass it anyway. And this is not about actually passing a motion to release the Epstein files because they know Donald Trump is going to block it. He's going to veto it. And they don't even know if it's going to pass the Senate. The point of the discharge petition is to get Republicans on board to vote to release it. And we're already hearing some members are caving. There's like four more come out, and I can't remember which four, that have said, yes, we are going to vote to release the Epstein files. Okay, that brings the number up to 222. Automatically going to pass if as soon as it gets called for a vote, if they all do what they said. Now, Donald Trump apparently was calling Lauren Boebert off and on during the day, trying to get her to change her vote and to scratch her name off the discharge petition to stop it. Same with Nancy Mace. That didn't work. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't think is going to change her vote. She has been one of the most outspoken about releasing the Epstein files. In fact, she has even said that if they don't release the files, she would be more than willing to read the victims' names and their accuser or the people they are accusing of being in the files and who has done all these horrible things to them, to read all their names on the House floor while she has the floor. Now, why would she do that? Well, there is a rule that, and there is a, believe it's a law actually, but they cannot be prosecuted and charged for anything they say. It's called the speech and debate clause. While they are on the floor and while they are in session and they are talking in an official capacity as a member of Congress, they cannot be sued, they cannot be arrested, they cannot be charged or anything because of anything that gets brought up with the files or with anything they talk about. So Marjorie Taylor Greene says, hey, I'll talk about it on the floor because she knows she's protected. But more than that, it goes into official records, etc., and it puts pressure on other Republicans. So some of these are not backing down, and now more are coming forward saying, yes, I'm going to vote for the files. Now, when they finally hold this vote, you are staring at the possibility of some people are estimating anywhere between 40, 60 to 100 members of the House of Representatives could vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files. And I've talked about that I think that's entirely possible because they don't want to have to go answer their voters for protecting the Epstein files and for not having them, for not keeping them hidden or whatever. They don't want to go to their voters and say, hey, yeah, I voted to keep them hidden. There's nothing to see there. The Republican voters want to see it. Now, of course, Donald Trump is trying to play it off. It's a hoax. It's a sham. It's a scam. You're seeing some of the MAGA commenters that don't want to admit that Donald Trump had something to do with it. They're coming back with the typical talking point. Why didn't Joe Biden release it when he was in power? Because Joe Biden was not that kind of president. That is not how the DOJ is supposed to operate. What the DOJ is supposed to do, and we find out Merrick Garland really didn't do that. He was an ineffectual attorney general. But they should have taken the information from the Epstein files, done their investigation, charged those they could, and moved on. And done. If they would have charged them, that evidence would have come out in trials, and we wouldn't be talking about it right now. But Merrick Garland, they had other things they were working on. It looked like we thought they were focusing on the January 6th case and all of that. Turns out they were focusing on the January 6th low-level defendants and all of those people, the ones that Donald Trump ultimately pardoned when he got back in office. But they dragged their feet going after the politicians. It wasn't until public outcry got loud enough that they turned around and said, okay, we have to go after it. We have to do something. And that's when he appointed Jack Smith. Now, he appoints Jack Smith. Jack Smith does a great job and goes from having no charges to having people indicted and starting to move the process forward rather quickly in a matter of months. I think it was 8 to 10 months. But that process should have been going the whole time. But they should have also been working on the Epstein files. But they didn't. They had Ghislaine Maxwell. They had Jeffrey Epstein was gone by that point. They weren't doing anything with it. But if they would have gone the normal course, all the information would have come out into the public light at some point. And because every time they went to trial, they would have released more and more and more information. It would have become a snowball effect. I don't know why Merrick Garland chose not to do it. But they were not going after anybody, so that's what happened. See, but MAGA Republicans, they look at it and they go, well, Donald Trump would have released it if it was bad news for Biden. They would have done it. They released bad things when it came to Hillary. And that's the difference between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans are looking at it going, how can we cheat? What can we do? We got to discredit them. We don't have good policies that we can tout, so we have to go with these underhanded tactics. Whereas Democrats are going, okay, we'll win on policy. We don't have to go to that route. They should be doing some of that because with these Epstein files, we need to know what kind of people that we're dealing with and that we're electing. And I think ultimately Donald Trump being connected to the Epstein files may end up being a bridge too far. And you may see Republicans walking away. Now, some stuff has come out in the last day. Yesterday, they released like 20 some thousand pages more of information. And of course, there are a lot of people that are digging through it and searching and looking for anything they can find. And this is only another small batch of files that we are dealing with. And that batch has some emails, okay? And they're talking not directly to Donald Trump, but about Donald Trump. And one of the things they talk about in there, Jeffrey Epstein is talking to this Michael Wolff, who is an author, and says that Donald Trump, I believe that's who he was talking to. I may get the recipient wrong, but anyway, they were talking about Donald Trump being at one of Epstein's properties with a young underage woman for hours. Okay, that's bad news for Donald Trump. And then they talk about him being the dog that doesn't bark. And I'm not quite sure what they meant by that. I don't know if they mean that, he's not turning any evidence and he's keeping his mouth shut, if that's what they mean, if it's something like that, or if they're just referring to him as like a good lapdog, a good puppet, that he knew definitely what was going on with, them recruiting girls out of Mar-a-Lago. I don't know what that all meant. And then there's another one where it says something about he had enough to end Donald Trump, and he was about 75% of the way ready to do that. Now, some of these emails are quite old. They go back as far as 2011. That's 14 years ago. Again, why didn't the DOJ at any point during that go after some of these people? If we're talking 2011, I don't know what time it was. I think 2009. No, that doesn't sound right. 2019, I think, when he died in prison. And I don't remember when he got charged. So I can't tell you whose administration it was when he got caught for everything he was finally doing. Um, but why weren't they going after any of these people? Well, if it was because it was Donald Trump, and if it was during the Trump administration's first term, that would explain it. But see, Donald Trump has been hoping ever since he ran on this whole idea of releasing the Epstein files. He really thought he was going to be able to say, we're going to release the Epstein files and I'm going to let you see them. And then what he was going to be able to do is, in his mind, is he was going to be able to come out and say, okay, okay, we looked at them. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing. And his base would go, yeah, okay, and move on. And they're not doing that. He doesn't know how to react. He doesn't know what to think. He doesn't know what to do. So he keeps doubling and tripling down. Well, he was the one who brought up releasing the Epstein files. And now some things are coming out and they are being leaked, or released, maybe is a better word, to the media from the House Oversight Committee, which is Republican run. They got these emails from the Epstein estate. Okay. And the Epstein estate had to preserve them because of the criminal proceedings that had been going on, not only against Jeffrey Epstein, but against uh, Ghislaine Maxwell and potentially any other co-defendants that were brought up, not to mention any civil cases, etc. So these are being released, and now Donald Trump is, of course, trying to spin away from it. He's trying to divert and distract from it. Um, and I don't know if this was the reason the House passed it so quickly, was so it could give Donald Trump something positive to talk about, uh, and try to get away from the fact these files came out, or if these files came out because they passed it, because this is a sign of Republicans breaking from Donald Trump. And they're starting to walk away. Like I said, we have 4 or 5 Republicans additionally saying they are going to vote to release the Epstein files. Now, what could happen with all of this? Donald Trump has been minimally linked at this point in the files. And as this keeps going, there's going to come to a point where there's more evidence. Okay. Now, what happens if passes the House with 100 plus votes? Okay. And let's just say they get to the bare minimum. They get to 60 in the Senate, but it passes and Donald Trump vetoes it because we know he will. And I don't even care if it's what they consider a regular veto, which is he vetoes it, it goes back to Congress and they have a chance to pass it. Or I believe there's also something where it's called a pocket veto, where he can veto it and he has so long to veto it, or when he does veto it, Congress has so long to act. And if they're out on a recess or a holiday break and they don't act, uh, that they don't get a chance to bring it back. I'm not 100% sure about that one, but I've seen other creators talking about it, and I seem to remember hearing something about that before. So I'm not sure if that is or isn't a thing. I will look into it. I'll probably get back to you about it tomorrow. But um, anyway, if he vetoes it, doesn't matter. Goes back to Congress, assuming they can pass it around his veto. What happens when they do? All the files get released. Donald Trump gets embarrassed. But I had another thought. What happens if he does veto it and they passed it with a wide margin? Maybe not enough to go around his veto, but 60 votes in the Senate, and they pass it with 100 votes to spare in the House. Could they draw up articles of impeachment against Donald Trump? You might think I'm crazy for thinking Republicans would impeach Donald Trump, but they're starting to break from him. You've got Senate Republicans saying, no, we're not getting rid of the filibuster. And they didn't. He was pushing for them to do it daily. They never caved. They never said, yes, sir, we'll do that. No, they didn't. They kept going. Then you had, you'll have this Epstein vote where if they break, we've already seen now, I think eight or nine House Republicans saying, yeah, I'll vote to release it. We don't know yet what the Senate's going to do with it. They may end up ultimately voting to pass the Affordable Care Act subsidies, again, against Donald Trump's wishes. The Republicans are starting to break away. So it is possible that when he vetoes the Epstein files, and if he is in them, because they would know with doing things like the House Oversight Committee, they could draft articles of impeachment, Republican led articles of impeachment. And I know it sounds crazy to think that Republicans would walk away from Donald Trump that far. But what do politicians crave more than anything? Power. Well, they're looking at 26 going, we're getting our asses kicked. Now, I know some people are saying, well, we're not voting Democrat in the midterms. There is going to be so much more shit that comes up beyond this government shutdown. And I know the government shutdown is bad, but it wouldn't surprise me if even more horrible things come up between here and there. And especially if the scenarios I've thrown out there about maybe they're playing the Republicans to get them to vote on the subsidies, maybe that does happen. Okay. Then the Democrats got that win. Well, then their momentum is right back and they're building. And Republicans are looking at it going, we're getting our asses kicked in the midterms. Now, there's a lot of Republicans that have already said, hey, we're not seeking reelection. They don't want to go out on a loss. And that's good news for Democrats. But again, with Donald Trump and this Epstein thing, if he vetoes it, they could say, okay, we got to rebrand going into the midterms and we got to rebrand for 28. Being connected to Donald Trump, especially with him being in the files, we know what we've already released. We have connections with him to Epstein, and there's more coming. Maybe something else, after they have this discharge petition, maybe the oversight committee releases even more that involves Donald Trump. I never thought we'd get even these 2 or 3 emails that mention Donald Trump. I thought these are horrible enough with the way they talk about him and they weren't even to Donald Trump. They're just about him. Um, and I mean, you got to take them for what they're worth, but I didn't think we'd see anything even like that. I thought there was a chance the Republicans would scrub any and all mention of Donald Trump, and you'd never see these until Democrats were back in control of the DOJ. So what happens? They could ultimately impeach him. And if the Republicans lead it, I am going to stick my neck out like I have in the past, and I'm going to say the same thing I've said before. If while the Republicans are in control of the House, I I would be surprised if they impeach him and he doesn't get removed. Okay? I think if they bring articles of impeachment against him in the House, they will know they have the votes to get rid of him in the Senate. They will already know that it's coming. Now, maybe they start working on the articles of impeachment and they try to do to him what the Republicans in the 70s did to Nixon and say, they go, hey, look, Donnie, uh, we know that, you know, you know that we're looking at impeaching you. We have the votes to impeach you. We have the votes to convict you. You're going to go down. It's just a matter of by how bad. You have a choice. Resign. But Donald Trump's ego probably wouldn't let him do that. So they would have to impeach and remove him. And he would torch the Republican Party on his way down. He would try to do it. But the one reason they may try to do this with the Epstein files over anything else he has done is because with the Epstein files, this may be the one thing that MAGA actually cares enough about that says, oh shit, we understand why you're turning on Donald Trump. Because MAGA doesn't want to turn on Donald Trump. A lot of them revere him, etc., and they don't want to turn on him. And the Republicans haven't turned on him this far because they want to get reelected. Okay, so they want to get reelected, and they need that 30% of the MAGA base that won't vote for you if you've turned on Donald Trump. Well, this may be the thing that forces them to consider turning on him, where they can at least defend it to the MAGA base and have a chance at getting elected again without having to worry about pissing off MAGA. Maybe this is when they finally walk away and, get away from Donald Trump. But what happens if they impeach him? Well, then we have J.D. Vance as president. Now, is J.D. Vance going to be better or worse? Ultimately, better. And not because he is a good person, not because he is smart, not because he is going to do great things for this country. Mostly because he will not be deciding things by tweet. He will not be deciding things at 1 a.m. in the middle of the night when he's awake and can't sleep. He's going to listen to the advice of people, and he's not going to be doing harebrained, half-cocked, half-thought-out ideas, all for posing for posture, etc. And especially if the House and the Senate have come together, Congress has taken the extraordinary step of doing something that had never been done before and removing a sitting president, that he would probably be staring at going, oh shit, I got to keep my shit together or they're going to remove me too. Now, I want to touch on a couple of things. Mike Johnson will not become the vice president. I know I talk about it a lot, but I still see comments and people talking about, well, when Donald Trump dies, Speaker Johnson becomes VP. No, they do not automatically get appointed and approved up one ladder when there's a vacancy. The only time that happens is from vice president to president. Now, what would happen? J.D. Vance would need to pick a new VP. Now, he would have to pick somebody relatively moderate. And you might be thinking, why? Well, because it requires 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. Both chambers are barely over 50% Republican. They do not have anywhere close to 67% of both chambers for a vote. So they would have to pick a moderate. Okay. So J.D. Vance picks a moderate. They get approved through the House, they get approved through the Senate, they take the oath of office, they become VP. Now, what happens if he picks a MAGA loyalist? They don't get that 2/3 number. The VP spot sits empty. And the only way the Speaker of the House is in line for the presidency is if, while there is no VP, something happens to the president. Um, and which could happen, but JD Vance is relatively young, appears to be relatively healthy, and if they're trying to separate him, from Donald Trump, he's not going to be taking, and doing a lot of the high risk stuff. He's not going to, it's probably going to be better. And I don't know if anything would happen to JD Vance, but ultimately, I think he would settle on somebody more moderate. Now, some people have suggested or asked, could this be possible? And I'm going to say probably not, unless JD Vance does something ridiculously bad. And what am I talking about? Well, they've asked the question, what happens if JD Vance picks somebody like Brian Kemp out of Georgia, a reasonable, moderate Republican? Okay, he may get 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, or maybe a Republican like Adam Kinzinger. I don't know if Liz Cheney would, but anymore she seems more moderate than some. Maybe Liz Cheney, whoever that moderate Republican is, but somebody who can get the 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. He selects them. And then they've suggested, well, they'll just remove JD Vance too, and that person will become president. That way they can be completely into a new administration, away from the stench of Donald Trump, and try to rebuild and rebrand for 28. I could see them trying it. However, unless the case is airtight against JD Vance and he has done something completely and totally fucked, I could also see Democrats saving JD Vance and saying, no, this was your guy. You don't get a do-over halfway through the term because your guys suck, setting up a more favorable matchup in 28. I think going into 28, you are going to have potentially JD Vance and maybe a Marco Rubio, maybe a more moderate Republican, but probably somebody like Rubio on the ticket. And that's who the Democrats are going to have to go up against. Now, one of the names that has been floated as well is like Don Jr., but I don't think by the time Donald Trump is out of office, especially if he gets connected to Epstein, I don't think there's going to be any want to have a Trump in the Oval Office at all. Now, as it goes, you've got this big ballroom that Donald Trump is building. And some people are saying, what's going to happen with it if Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term? Because we were just talking about the possibility of him getting removed. I don't know. Question's going to come up. Do they rebuild it? Do they ultimately just rebuild the East Wing? Might depend on what's done and how close they are to being finished with the ballroom. We're not even sure if it's going to be done by the end of Donald Trump's presidency as it stands going into 29. Now, I'm seeing differing numbers for what we need, and MAGA's trying to defend this. They're trying to defend it so hard. Oh, we need a big gathering space, etc. Well, they're talking a 90,000 square foot ballroom. And I've heard two differing numbers. One number said 9,000 or 999 people. One said 650 people. But 90,000 square foot, that's pretty big. How is it only fitting that few of people in a ballroom? They already had a small ballroom in the East Wing that got torn down, but it only held like 200, 250 people, something like that. But now they want to only build something. If the number actually is 650, that's only three times the occupancy. But we're building it for 90,000 square feet. Something there doesn't make sense. Not to mention, we talk about the price, and the price per square foot doesn't seem to add up with what other buildings of similar, size and stuff would cost. Now, I know there's more to it about making sure it meets a certain aesthetic, and you're dealing with a historical building like the White House, so there's going to be added details there, plus the additional security required for a place like the White House, etc. That's going to add some to the cost, but it doesn't quite justify the price tag that's there. So what happens with it? I don't know. And one thing I have not seen, I had heard somebody was suggesting it in the live last night, but I have not looked into it yet myself. That there was money snuck into this funding bill to fund the government that will pay for the ballroom. Now, I don't know if that's true. That might be a conspiracy theory floating around. Like I said, I have not looked that deep into it yet. Um, but if there is money in there, then that means Donald Trump's whole premise of it's going to be completely private funded and there's not a dollar of taxpayer money is going to be used to build it was a lie. And this may have been part of the plan all along. Try to force some kind of a deal, sneak that in there, make sure that they can get it funded and paid for with taxpayer money. And then while we're so worried about everything else going on, we're not paying attention to them putting it in that bill. It's possible. It could have happened. We'll have to look into it and see. Today is going to be a bad day for Donald Trump, even though he got the win last night with signing the law opening the government back up. That is going to be a big win. Expect him to crow about that today and talk about how great it was that he finally got him. He got the Democrats to cave and on all of this. But expect more to be coming out of that 20,000 page info dump about the Epstein files. As we hear more and more, as people start combing through it with a fine tooth comb looking for any references, some of these things are things we had never seen before. And we're only seeing the highlights so far. They've only been out for not even a day yet. And we've already found 3 references to Donald Trump. And they don't make him look good. It's going to get worse for Donald Trump. He is going to have Republicans start to break away from him. He's not going to know how to deal with it because, in his mind, they should be loyal to him. He should be able to bully and pressure and put all this campaign against him to do whatever he wants. And now that they're starting to see the writing on the wall, they have no reason to stay inside with Donald Trump other than they think they can get something out of him. And that time is starting to dwindle. Ultimately, this could be the one thing that gets MAGA to turn on Donald Trump because MAGA wants to, in their own weird way, I know they have other issues, but when it comes to people doing those kind of things to children, yes, MAGA actually does seem to care, and they do not want to see people do that kind of thing. But they've also been conditioned to believe that it was only Democrats that would be on that list. And now that they are going to be confronted with Donald Trump being on there, some of them are going to start seeing the light, and others are going to try to rebuild reality and try to come up with excuses, etc., move the goalposts, blame Joe Biden for not releasing anything, or come back with the famous, well, what if Bill Clinton's in there? Well, Bill Clinton hasn't been relative and he hasn't been around in politics in 25 years. Doesn't matter. He hasn't been relevant. What's the point? If he's in there, again, we need to know his name and legacy needs to be tarnished. And if there's any sort of criminal or civil thing that can go after him for it, should happen. But that should happen for anybody in those files, period. And I had a MAGA come into my comments on a video I did about this yesterday, asking if I was in the files. That's going to be one of their new talking points is blaming any Democrat talking about the files being released and any potential connection to Donald Trump, trying to say that, well, you'll be in it again because they are convinced it's going to be nothing but left-leaning people, nothing but Democrats. And the MAGA view, and I think even the Republican Party for a bit, is going to be suffering when these files come out. You could be seeing a massive shift away from the Republican Party as a response to the Epstein files. And that this could be something that does the Republican Party in for a while, above and beyond everything Donald Trump has done, above and beyond everything else going on. This may be the one thing that ends MAGA, ends the Republican Party, and ends Donald Trump once and for all. And he's not doing well handling all of it. And if he is in as bad a shape mentally and physically as what we're talking about, and what we have, as bad as we have said he is, and as bad as he appears to be, the added stress of this big weight that he has been carrying being brought to light and people talking about it and blaming him and talking about him being with victims and underage girls and all of this as he is trying desperately to get away from it. This may be the thing that not only uh, figuratively does him in, as far as MAGA breaking away, Republicans breaking away, etc. The stress from it all may be what ultimately physically does him in. He's not in a good place physically. He's not in a good place mentally. And he's under added stress. And then you add this stress on top of all of that. It could be too much for him. Now, some people are suggesting that this may be his last holiday season, or that he has already seen his last holiday season. Only time will tell if that's the case. But this may not be a very enjoyable holiday season for Donald Trump, as this is hanging over his head. And, he's going to be waiting for it to drop and actually affect him. All right, so I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. That's everything I got for you today on the Analytical Iowan podcast. Of course, I'm going to be back tomorrow. There's going to be more to talk about, possibly more Epstein related things, and probably some more crazy things done by Donald Trump in response to everything that was leaked yesterday from the Epstein files. So I will be back tomorrow.